What if I told you that I am standing on dry sand, and in that sand, I am going to try to grow a vegetable garden? And what if I told you that I did? Hey everyone, Natissa here, and welcome back to You Can Grow Too. In this video, I want to show you how I grew food in nothing but my native soil, which is basically just sand. No store-bought materials, only resources that I have on my property that I believe most of you have on your property too. I garden here in the subtropics of Florida, zone 10, and like I said, it is hot, it is humid, and the soil is pure sand. No nutrients, no moisture holding abilities. When it is dry, it is hydrophobic and the water just runs right off. It does no good. Now, when I build a garden bed, I usually do go to the grocery store and buy the compost. I do check for herbicides, but I also get the peat moss, get the fertilizers, just to help jumpstart the bed. But what if for whatever reason we were not able to get some of these materials? I've actually had this happen. So the question is very real to me. What if I wanted to grow some of my own food and I couldn't get them? I couldn't get the compost, couldn't get the peat moss, the fertilizers. Would I still be able to grow some of my own food in nothing but sand? So I tried it, and this is how it went. I started this experiment in late spring, and here, spring feels like summer. It is already hot, it is already humid, and the only available space I really had was underneath my oak tree. So it was getting some morning sun, it was getting some dappled shade in the high afternoon, which is very good here where I garden here in Florida. Our sun is very intense, and the heat is super high. I started by measuring out a 3-foot by 3-foot area. I did go a little over just in case that, some grasses were to grow in and that sort of thing. I was able to still have my 3-foot by 3-foot space. And it's also very realistic for me because, yes, I could till up the whole backyard and do this, but realistically, how much resources do I have on my property to help build the sandy soil? So that little 3-foot by 3-foot space was good for me. Then I started digging, and it's not hard at all. Like I said, it's basically just sand. Just had to get through that grass, which I did dig out and put aside so we can use that for mulch and organic matter for this garden space. No clay, no hard sand ground like some people do have, so this wasn't that difficult of a task for me. Now, before I go further, I do want to lay out the ground rules that I had for myself in this experiment. No store-bought materials were allowed. Even if I already had it on my property, I didn't want to count those as some of my resources. I'd still have compost, still have peat moss, I have bags of fertilizers, but I wanted to use none of it. Nothing that was store-bought at all. No homemade compost. I do make my own compost. I wanted this experiment to be very accessible for anyone to do. And yes, many of us might be able to make our own compost with our own resources, of course, but it takes a lot of time for that organic matter to break down. So I wanted it to be something that for most of us, if we wanted to grow some of our own food and wanted to use the resources we had, many of us might not have homemade compost ready to go. I don't even always have it ready to go. It takes a while. No outside mulch resources. And there are programs out there in many places, including here, where you can get free mulch, and we do that. But that is sometimes hard to get. So I wanted to make sure the mulch that I was using in this project would be just on my property. But I did say yes to compost tea because I think most of us are able to get a bucket or some sort of container with a lid on it, and you can put in food scraps, you can put in weeds from your yard, and there's other ways that you can make compost tea as well, and that is something I think very accessible, and the time to make it is not as long as homemade compost. Sometimes just putting the weeds in a bucket of water, that can sometimes just take, a few weeks in itself. So I thought that was very doable. And I also said yes to rainwater. I do have a rainwater storage system, and I know that not everyone has that, but I did think it was okay to use it in this way. And that is, I think most of us can catch rainwater maybe off of our roof in a watering can, in a bucket. So of course, if it rained outside, you know, the garden is going to get watered by the rain. But I did allow myself 1 watering can's worth of water after each rain, just because, like I said, I think it'd be accessible for us to at least collect that much. So now that we got all the ground rules in place of what I did in this growing in nothing but sand experiment, I started mulching my beds, and I, like I said, didn't use any outside sources. So I went around my yard, and it did just rain right before I started doing this project. And I don't know if this is because I have sand, but after a good rain, a lot of organic matter, I guess it kind of floats to the surface, you could say. And I'll have leaves, I'll have dried out broken grass, bits of twigs, all laying on the surface. And I usually take my little hand rake and I rake it up, and I started filling buckets of it and just dumping it right on this sandy bed. And this mulch that I have sourced from my property, this is going to help keep the moisture in because of the rain and as I water the garden. And it's also going to break down and help provide organic matter for this sand. And we need that for, like I said, holding in moisture, but also building nutrition, because sand really doesn't have any nutrition in it at all. You can also use leaves on your property. Maybe you chopped and dropped or trimmed some sort of plants in your yard, and you can use that yard waste to lay it on top and use it as a mulch. Even cutting your grass, instead of throwing it away, lay it on top of your garden bed. Now, I did do something that I admit I was a little hesitant of doing because I wasn't sure if this went against the rules, is that I grow intentional plants for chop and drop. And one of those plants is the perennial sunflower I always talk about. And in that plant, once you chop it and drop it, it has the potential of putting nitrogen and I think potassium into the ground as it breaks down. So I did do 1 layer of chop and drop of that. I was tempted to do more, but I thought, no, I will just do the 1 layer. And that's something that you can do as well, even if you don't have that exact plant. Like I said, in your own yard, when you're chopping and trimming things, lay it down on the bed. Use it as mulch. So after I did that, and continually did that, because here where I live, organic matter breaks down fast, and especially with the sand, it really breaks down quickly. I did put borders on the bed, and this is something you do not have to do, and it's probably pretty obvious. I didn't go to the store and buy this. I just looked around my yard, happened to have some old wood pieces, random stones, and just stuck it together. Because I personally like to have a framework for the garden. I like to have borders. It just helps me garden better. I just see where I need to grow, see what I need to weed out. So that's something that you can do too. Look around, find some logs, find some stones, whatever it is that you have on your property. Now that phase 1 was done, I still wanted to continue building up my bed. Instead of using the store-bought compost, the store-bought peat moss, and the fertilizers, every other day I had food scraps, paper waste, and I would take some of the debris that was in my compost tea, and I would also fill up a container of water and put a bit of compost tea in there just to dilute it a little bit so it wasn't too strong. And every other day, I would take these materials that were on my property, dig a hole, put it in there, and bury it. Then about 2 days later, I would do the same, but move over a foot. And as the months went by, organic matter was being put into this garden bed. And again, adding mulch of whatever was on my property to help keep that moisture in from that compost tea I was pouring in each of the holes, from any of the rain that we might have gotten, and also just watering the bed with a hose. It was about 3 months later that I stopped putting organic matter into the bed, except for mulch, because I wanted there to be some time for the organic matter to break down when I started putting plants in it. And this was still summertime, so we still have our heat and humidity, and it was breaking down everything underground really fast. In early October, I did plant some seeds from my seed saving experiment, and it happened to be mustard greens that have been crossed. And shockingly, these mustard greens survived the hurricanes that we had, and I did a whole video on it, had to leave the house, and everything was in the dark, in a house that had no circulation. but they survived. And when they got big enough, I did plant them in our garden bed. And later in the sandy bed, I did plant kale seeds. And throughout the season, I was very intentional about using compost tea because, yes, like I said, I believe most of us can make compost tea in whatever circumstance we are in. So I would take that and dilute it in my watering can, fill the watering can up with water, and just put a scoop of compost tea in it. And that's how I'd water the plants. And we started harvesting right away because usually with leafy greens, you can get a harvest fast. So these greens were in about a month's time and they were showing great promise. There was no yellowing on the leaves. They were looking really good. And this was also about the time that we adopted our puppy at the time, Lunabelle. And that is when I thought, I need to go out in the garden, show you how this experiment is going because all my time was going to Lunabelle. So here's how the experiment of growing in nothing but sand has turned out. It is now the first week of December and we started this project on the first week of June, and here we are a half a year later and we have grown food in our sand. And look, a puppy. This is little Lunabelle. All right, goodbye little one. And everything in here has been growing in this bed for about a month, so it had time to definitely situate itself. And I've been doing compost tea every week and everything looks good and lush. And a lot of these are seedlings of different mustards that I've had from my saving seed video. And I also did plant some kale from seed. Oh no, Lunabelle. The puppy is wanting to go into that bed because she knows it's so good. And you can see that we've already been harvesting for the last few weeks, actually. Not too long after we put the seedlings in, we were harvesting and had some big harvests. Some of them have been just a handful of leaves here and there, but this is really, really good. Also, I have planted in the corner are some peas. I don't see any flowering yet, but it is looking really, really good. I could have maybe planted a whole thing of peas, or in the summertime maybe have done a chop and drop with another crop, but I like the decision I made. It worked out very good. This is something anyone can do. Look at you. Look at you. Growing in sand. That's you. And something else I do want to point out is I do have a border around my bed. You do not need a border around your garden bed at all. And obviously this is something I just threw together because the whole point of this experiment is to use what you have on hand in order to grow food. And I just like to have garden barriers because it helps me with growing and what I need to do. Just some pieces of wood that I found around the yard and some random stones. So my final thoughts on this experiment of growing food in nothing but sand and resources that I have on my property is that this experiment worked very well. The plants were so healthy, and with green crops like these, it will show you very fast if it's not getting enough nutrition, not getting enough water. So for it to be green from the start, very healthy as well, all the way till even after the tour that you have just seen, I was very impressed. Now, could the reason be it was because of what I was growing? And I will say, perhaps, my original plan for this experiment was to actually grow a crop that was a root crop, a fruit crop, some sort of bean, some sort of green, a flower, and an herb, just to compare all the different plants and how they would react in the sand and the resources that I had in building up that sand. But I got to thinking to myself, I need to be realistic about this space because it was nothing but sand. I was only using the resources I had on my property. And I was thinking maybe the mustard greens would work better with that. I mean, it did very well, like I'd said. But the question is, could tomatoes have worked if I'd done that? Maybe a cabbage head, because that takes a lot of nutrition. I was going to try carrots, but I didn't do carrots. But I did have peas growing, as you saw, and they did come to fruition. We did harvest peas, but Lunabelle discovered she loves peas, and she actually took out the entire plant in the end. But we also had nasturtiums that self-seeded in the bed, and I just let them grow, and they grew very well. So the question is, could those other crops have worked? And maybe they could have, but I wanted to be realistic for success, and we had success. Now, another thing I could have done instead of burying the food scraps, paper waste, compost tea, and all that, is I could have used cover crops. And I've just done a video on what cover crops are and how I'm using them this summer in my garden. But I just chose not to, but that is something I really could have done. I could have, here in my climate, maybe have grown cowpeas, a whole bed of them, and as they grew, I could have chopped and dropped them, let the roots decay and break down in the ground with the nitrogen nodules in there, and take that maybe green manure, which is basically the plant matter. I could have chopped and dropped it on the bed, or maybe tilled it under just a little ways, just to help build up that sandy soil, giving it organic matter. But I just chose not to, but that is an option for you to do. And whatever climate you are in is going to base on when you're going to plant that and what you're going to plant. Which then leads me to the other question that I had during this project, and that was, could anybody do this? And I think yes, but some things to consider is your climate. I am here where it is extremely hot and humid in our summertime, and that allows for more breakdown of organic matter, and sand does that as well, because you can, gosh, I don't know about your climate, but here with the sand and the heat and humidity, it just eats up our organic matter very fast. I can lay down compost and it is just gone within a matter of months. So you might do exactly what I've done. You might do things a little differently. It just depends. Also the timing. I did this in the summer when my heat and humidity is at its peak, so the breakdown would be fast. So I could build that garden bed for fall and winter, which is a big growing season for us here in the deep south. But I've heard of other climates where they put their garden beds to bed. They put it to rest, so to speak, during their winter time. But in those climates, you might get freezes, it might get super cold, but that slows down the breakdown of organic matter. And like I said, with cover cropping, you might use something different than what I would have done if I did it that way in this experiment. So, you really got to look at your garden, where you are at, and all the factors that come with it, because that's going to affect everything. Bottom line, from what I hear from most other climates and most other native soils, whatever it might be, is organic matter, your food scraps, your paper wastes, your yard waste, all this organic material and resources that you have on your property can help build up your garden spaces. We don't need to depend on store-bought resources. Now, for those of us that do have the ability to use store-bought resources to help build up our garden, the question is this experiment worth it for you? And I think still, yes, it is. Whether it be you do it in the way that I have done it in this video, or you just make your own compost from your own resources, or grow, chop, and drop plants, use the resources you have on your property in some way to help build your gardens up, to help grow some of your own food. Now, should we not use store-bought items? Should we shame those that go to the store and get their compost and all their things? No. I still use a lot of store-bought items. I still buy compost. I still buy the peat moss to help. I just look at these items as tools while they are available to me. And I have experienced going to the store and them not having what I needed, and not having what I needed for a while. So between that, even my free source of mulch was not available all season. And these experiences of not having them available to me has really shown me that I need to develop systems and habits now, so that way I can have that peace and security of knowing that I can still grow my own food if I need to with what I have on my property. And you can too. Give it a try. Start building your system and good garden habits, so that way you can start building security and peace in your garden, in your life, with the resources that you have. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. what if I told you that, aw, your tail, oh my gosh, look, we got a new puppy. Okay, here you go. And what if I told you that I did?